This is a 2000 Dodge Viper GTS Coupe that's got about 38,000 miles on it, and it's in pretty much the same condition it was when it rolled off the assembly line over 20 years ago. The engine's completely unmodified, the interior is all original, and it still has its oddly quiet stock exhaust. It even had a set of 22-year-old tires on it when I picked it up earlier this year. And in this video, we're going to find out how much power we can squeeze out of this bone stock Viper by just dyno tuning it. You'll also get some basic insight into the tuning process, as we'll explain what settings we're changing on the Viper's computer and why. We'll be carrying out this vehicular experiment at Street to Sand Off-Road in Reno, Nevada. They specialize in building and tuning Camaros, Corvettes, Mustangs, Chargers, old school hot rods, all kinds of off-road vehicles, and they'll also fulfill unique requests like LS3 swapping your 2006 Buick Rainier. The owner of Street to Sand, Dustin, has literally tuned over 1,000 vehicles, from Bentleys and Ferraris to my buddy's Camaro, and of course my Mustang at least half a dozen times, so I know the Viper's in good hands. The first order of business is to set some baseline numbers. The Viper's 8-liter V10 was able to generate 410 horsepower and 450 pound-foot of torque at the wheels, which in my opinion is a pretty solid baseline. But I want you to take a look at the second chart that plots the air-fuel ratio over the RPM range. The dashed red line represents the optimal air-fuel ratio for safely maximizing horsepower at wide-open throttle. And on a big naturally aspirated engine like this one, that's about 12.5 parts of air per part of fuel by mass. And we can see that from around 3,500 to 5,000 RPM, the Viper stock tune is injecting too much fuel into the cylinders. This condition is known as running rich, and it's causing a dip in the torque curve. So the first thing we're going to adjust is the fuel table, where we'll dial back the fuel by telling the computer to target an air-fuel ratio of 12.5 at 4,000 RPM. Then we'll apply some smoothing to the fuel curve so our fuel changes are gradual, install the new tune, and do another run. Our adjustments to the fuel table significantly improved the air-fuel ratio around 4,000 RPM. This removed most of the dip in the torque curve and enabled the Viper to make 412 wheel horsepower and 457 pound-foot of torque. But the Viper did start running rich above 4,500 RPM because the smoothing we applied to the fuel table was too broad. So now we'll revert the tune and reapply our fuel changes, but this time we'll smooth a narrower section of the RPM range and try again. This time the Viper made 418 wheel horsepower and 457 pound-foot of torque, and we can see that the air-fuel ratios have been pretty well stitched up along our guideline of 12.5. The idea is to first dial in the air-fuel ratios, or AFRs, then advance the timing, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. Changing an engine's timing adjusts the time at which the spark plugs ignite the air-fuel mixtures. Advancing timing means an earlier spark, while retarding timing means a later spark. Timing is measured in degrees of crankshaft rotation before top dead center. But all you need to understand is that advancing timing means the air-fuel mixture is ignited when the piston is at a lower point in the cylinder on the compression stroke. This allows more time for the combustion process to occur, which just means more chemical energy is released. So you'll generally find that advancing timing on an engine stock tune will increase power. But over-advancing timing can cause some of the air-fuel mixture to ignite outside of the normal combustion process. This is known as knock or detonation, which can not only reduce power, but in extreme cases can cause engine damage. So it's best to advance timing in small increments to ensure you're not causing too much knock. On this tune, we're advancing timing at 4,200 RPM by 3 degrees for a total of 29 degrees of timing, and leaving the fuel table as is so we can see what the effects are of just advancing timing. Our timing changes enable the Viper to make 428 wheel horsepower and 469 pound-foot of torque, which is our biggest improvement yet. And this is expected, as you'll generally see more gains from advancing timing than you would by tweaking air-fuel ratios alone. We can see the AFRs held up to the timing changes pretty well, but the engine did start running a bit lean above 5,000 RPM. So on this tune, we're increasing fuel by 2% at 5,300 RPM, advancing timing another 2 degrees at 4200 RPM for a total of 31, and adding 3 degrees from 5300 to 6100 RPM, bringing that section of the RPM range to 33 degrees. Our timing and fuel changes enabled the Viper to make 435 wheel horsepower and 475 pound-foot of torque. But the AFRs were pretty lean throughout most of the run. This caused some detonation above 4200 RPM, which can be seen by the turbulence in the horsepower and torque curves. This is a common side effect of significantly advancing timing without making requisite fuel increases. So now we're going to try to bring those AFRs down by increasing fuel by 5% across the entire RPM range. Our fuel adjustment enabled the Viper to put down 438 wheel horsepower and 483 pound-foot of torque. Not only is this our best run yet, but the AFRs are pretty much perfect, which is why the horsepower and torque curves are so smooth on this run. These results represent a 6.8% increase in horsepower and a 7.3% increase in torque over the stock run. And the Viper now makes over 400 pound-foot of torque from 2000 to 5500 RPM. We could advance timing even more from here, but since we're limited to 91 octane fuel and these old Viper engines tend to run hot, I decided to call it good here. So how does a roughly 7% increase in peak horsepower translate into real-world performance? Well, before I had the car tuned, I did a simple acceleration test by measuring how long it took the Viper to get from 30 to 80 miles per hour in second gear. On the stock tune, it was able to do it in 5.9 seconds. And after tuning, it was able to do it in 5.5 seconds, which just goes to show how much a vehicle's tune can affect its performance. Special thanks to Dustin at Street to Sand, who made this video possible by letting me document the tuning process and taking the time to answer all the questions I had along the way.